Trump says that unless something changes in the next number of hours, the United States will impose 25% tariffs on two of their biggest trading partners and certainly the closest geographical neighbors, Canada and Mexico. What does this mean for Americans? Will it restore their wealth? Could it lead to eliminating income tax, as the president has hinted? And of course, what does it mean for trading partners like Canada, whose economy depends a great deal on trade with the United States? It's a pleasure to welcome Sabine El-Chidiac from the Consumer Choice Center. She holds a BA in political science from the University of Toronto, an MA in political science from the University of Western Ontario. And joining Sabine today is her colleague, the U.S. policy analyst with Consumer Choice Center. She's going to be joining us from Detroit, Elizabeth Hicks, who's graduated with a BA in political science from the University of Iowa, spent a good portion of her career in Washington, D.C., and is now back in the Midwest. To both of you, thanks for making time for us. Thanks for joining us. Elizabeth, I want to start with you. Stateside, a lot of people are going, well, listen, Donald Trump has changed course last minute before. Perhaps there's a way that these tariffs can be avoided. There's, as you know, been delegates of diplomats from Canada and Mexico working hard on this ever since Trump swore in. Before that, even, what do you think the chances are that February 1st the tariffs are a go? Is this happening?
It is tough to say, but it seems that yes, it's likely that it will go through. We have heard potentially that oil will be excluded from these tariffs, but it's unclear as to if that will happen or not. These tariffs that are being proposed are really just being used as a negotiating tool. For what is unclear. Are we trying to just get the U.S. a better trade deal? At the end of the day, though, these tariffs are not going to work, and the consumers are the ones who are going to feel those negative effects.
Yeah, but do you get the sense that your fellow Americans buy into that they believe that? From the northern side of the border, we're seeing people cheer this on. It looks like everybody's a pretty big fan of it, and who wouldn't be when the president is promising a path to prosperity?
I think when you look into it, some may be excited, but when you look at what this is actually going to do, it's not going to bring cost of living down. It's not going to reduce the cost of goods. We've heard this rhetoric from President Trump before of, America first, buy American. Unfortunately, though, we need our trading partners. We need Canada in particular. And if we impose these types of tariffs, it is going to be problematic. I think consumers are very concerned about this. Of course, 25% on Canada is a problem. There also is the potential for retaliatory tariffs back on the US. Even if there aren't retaliatory tariffs put back on the US, it's still going to affect American consumers negatively. So I don't think it is as popular of a policy right now than the president might think.
This is the message, Sabine, that Canadian diplomats, you've got federal cabinet ministers, you got provincial premiers. Danielle Smith is doing what she can. Of course, you got Doug Ford doing what he can. Everybody's got their messages trying to change Donald Trump's mind. What's been your assessment of the Canadian response to the threat so far?
I think there's actually a pretty united front on the idea that tariffs are bad and that tariffs are just a tax on your own people, and it's going to hurt us. We're in an affordability crisis. My sense is that people realize that they're in an affordability crisis. They can't pay a lot of money for groceries and everyday essentials anymore. And these tariffs are just going to make things worse. And there is a support for people like Premier Ford, some support for Premier Smith in talking about the fact that tariffs are bad. Of course, there's different perspectives on how to deal with these tariffs, whether or not there should be retaliatory tariffs from Canada or if we should be avoiding that altogether. Those are a whole different story, and a lot of people have different perspectives on that.
Let me ask you this, because both of you are you're consumer experts. You're experts on market and spending and how people's behavior responds to fiscal realities, right? So, Sabine, my guess is the last thing that you would want to see is some sort of a trade war.
Oh, absolutely. Trade wars never end well for anybody. Tariffs are a tax on your own people, as I said earlier. So it's not going to be great for the United States, for the consumers in the United States, and it's not going to be great for consumers here in Canada. Nobody wins in a tariff war. You might seem as a politician like you're doing something and you're taking these, definitive actions. But at the end of the day, consumers are going to suffer just on their everyday essentials, groceries, clothing, at the pumps. It's very difficult for consumers, no matter what.
As mentioned, and maybe Elizabeth will ask you about this first, just because of the implications. Ontario's Premier Ford has been clear. He says, we could cut power to like 1.5 million homes in New York and Michigan and Minnesota. Do those types? I mean, it's pretty inflammatory, obviously, when a premier says something like that. We're also kind of, as Canadians, we're very proud, but we're also kind of not used to like punching the U.S. in the nose. Do you know what I mean? Except for in hockey, we're used to that. But other than that, we're not used to it. Do those types of clips, does that quote make its way stateside? Does that resonate with people in New York? Is that anything anybody's losing any sleep over?
Yes, absolutely. And being a Michigander myself, it's very concerning. A lot of our states are tied to Canadian imports. But when it comes to energy in particular, this is very frightening for us here in the United States. We heard from President Trump that a priority is to continue, drilling and procuring more oil and gas. However, we rely on a lot of the Canadian oil and gas, and so it would make a very big impact, and it is very alarming for us here in the States. So please don't cut off our power.
Yeah. Well, Sabine, what do we know about those types of threats in past? I'm sure, like off the top of my head, obviously there have been sort of international scuffles like this before. This is really nothing new. Probably just with a more bombastic president. It's gleaning more headlines, obviously. But I mean, I think back even to interprovincial trade wars. You remember when Rachel Notley imposed the BC wine ban and Albertans weren't able to get their BC wine for a while? This was over her scuffle, Christy Clark and pipelines and the like. How long do these types of things, these retaliatory type tariffs, typically last, and are they effective?
Oh, well, Ryan, if we look at history, it's pretty obvious that tariffs do not work, and retaliation to tariffs don't work either, and they just really, really hurt. And it may seem like it only hurts while the retaliation is in place, but there's actually, it's felt for a long time, but especially by consumers who are just trying to make ends meet. If you look back at history, there's so many examples of tariffs not working and retaliation not working. Even if you go back to like 1930, there's the Great Depression, there's the Smoot-Hawley tariffs. They put tariffs on Americans put tariffs on so many things, and world trade fell by like 66%, and it prolonged the Great Depression, and Canada retaliated, and by retaliating, they ended up in an economic depression. More recently, in 2018, we had the steel and aluminum tariffs that were imposed by President Trump, and they were felt a lot by Americans. They were paying the price for these issues, and even with washing machines that same year they wanted to make more washing machines in the United States, and they put a tariff on that, and dryers as well, because usually dryers are sold with washing machines, so it ended up being a tax on dryers indirectly as well. And it was Americans who ended up paying for that, millions and millions of dollars. And retaliation is just shooting ourselves in the foot. It sounds good. It sounds like we're doing something effective and strong to push back against these tariffs. But at the end of the day, we're just shooting ourselves in the foot. We're making sure that Canadians are going to be paying more for everyday essentials. And economists agree that tariffs and retaliatory tariffs, any tariffs at all, affect the poorest in society the most. So in a time when we're struggling with an affordability crisis, this is just bad policy.
Cherie's watching us live on YouTube right now on our Real Talk live chat powered by Park Power, your friendly local utilities provider. Cherie says, I check all my labels now, and I never used to do that to this degree. Buy Canadian, says Cherie. That's certainly one way that people are going to be impacted by this. They're going to find some motivation to either buy American if they're down in the States, to buy Canadian if they're in Canada. Economist Trevor Tombe has estimated, a conservative estimate, that if imposed, these tariffs could cost American households $1,900 annually. That's per household. Rather, $1,700 US annually, or $1,900 for Canadian households. This amid an affordability crisis. And Elizabeth, I'm pretty sure it's not just Canadians that are experiencing this affordability crisis right now, but there's a lot of people that are having. I mean, in our neck of the woods right now, this morning, it is dumping snow. It's going to be like minus 20 Celsius. Coming up tomorrow, people are paying more to heat their homes. People are paying more to feed their families. Among the American base, among Trump's American base, can you comment on what heaping $1,700 in added costs to the average household might do to voter loyalty, what it might do to people's bottom lines?
Yeah, I think it's safe to say that President Trump was elected under the campaign promises of making life more affordable. Under a previous administration, we saw inflation go way out of control. However, an increase of $1,700 per household is not going to be welcomed by anybody here in the United States. And I think that is going to cause some problems for the president and some issues with loyalty in his base.
Interesting comment here from Sailing Jura, who says, I think our best response would be to avoid the trade war and boost international media appearances to remind Americans that these increased costs are from the U.S. and not from Canada. I can comment on what's happening in our neck of the woods. I can comment on what I'm seeing all the time. The Premier of Alberta's principal secretary yesterday on her Instagram was, sharing photos of Danielle Smith doing an interview with Fox News. It appears to me that a Fox crew actually traveled to Edmonton to speak to the Premier. Do these work? Sabine, how important are these international media appearances? A lot of people have ripped Danielle Smith, saying she's just trying to get in front of cameras, wants to get in tighter with Tucker Carlson, wants her photo with Ron DeSantis, wants to rub shoulders with Donald Trump and Kevin O'Leary. But can that stuff actually sway the public?
I think anything you do that is not retaliatory tariffs is a good idea. Just trying to convince, policymakers that this is going to hurt so badly in Canada and the United States is important. If you're taking those meetings, if you're going out there and talking about it, I think it's a great idea because it's not putting retaliatory tariffs. If you're not putting retaliatory tariffs on as a response, then you're doing something good, in
Okay,
my
so
opinion.
what are everyone says, well, like, let's avoid the trade war. I just read a comment that said that, Elizabeth, and folks say, well, let's work on diplomacy instead. Can we all acknowledge, whether you're a big Trump supporter, whether you're a big Kamala supporter, or whether you don't care about politics at all, everybody knows, even if you watched him on The Apprentice, dealing with Donald is completely different than dealing with anybody else. There may be diplomacy, but it's got to be done differently. You mentioned earlier, Liz, that you're not even quite sure exactly what it is that Trump wants Canada and Mexico to do. He said that he wants to stop the flow of weapons and fentanyl across the border. He seems to be convinced that the U.S.-Canada border, obviously the largest shared border, it's a legendary border internationally for a million different reasons, but he's not convinced that it's safe. Do you think that that's actually what this is about, or is this Trump's long game towards something else? Where's your head at on it?
For me personally, it feels like it's more of a long game play. What he had said previously, to me, that doesn't necessarily apply to Canada. We've had a great relationship. Like you mentioned, we have a historic border. It's, I believe, the longest shared border in the world. So and it's operated very well. I think it's a play for something bigger. We're just unsure as to what. Is it going to be, renegotiations of the North American trading bloc potentially? We are just unsure. However, what we don't appreciate is President Trump is playing chicken with our checkbooks as consumers. And that's not what we think is what should be happening right now.
The interesting comment here, and I'm not surprised that some folks are basically pointing out this exempting oil and gas is pretty interesting because that feels like a win for Alberta, but not everybody in Alberta, right? Like Denise watching us on the live chat powered by Park Power says, Alberta oil and gas gets a pass, while Alberta agriculture and lumber is left out in the cold. James responded to him and said, yeah, what else is new? It's been kind of striking to see other industries haven't really been championed in the same way by the Premier. And then you could probably make the argument, I bet you that there's manufacturers, exporters in Manitoba, in Newfoundland, in Saskatchewan that would love to have as much light shone on their industries, and it just hasn't happened. Sabine, can you talk about the significance of oil and gas, and maybe, I don't know, I'm a decent poker player, not great, but I feel like all the talk about exempting oil and gas gives a bit of a hint, gives a bit of a clue that it is a powerful card to play. How should that card be played?
It's a very powerful card to be played, of course. Gas, we're the number one importer of crude oil to the United States, period. So we're the largest supplier of crude oil to the United States. if they're putting tariffs on that, hopefully they don't. Seems like it's going in that direction, but I can't say anything for sure, as usual on this trade war. It changes every minute, but if that's not included, that's great for both Americans and Canadians. But I do agree that it's too bad that this isn't being looked at for other industries like lumber. When we're talking about things like lumber, more expensive lumber means that we're paying more for our homes, both in Canada and the United States. It hits the lumber industry in Canada. They lose jobs, just like in the oil sector. They're going to lose jobs. The sector is going to suffer financially, and Americans are going to pay more for their homes. But they're already having problems paying for a home. There's a housing crisis both in Canada and the United States. If we're putting tariffs on lumber, less homes are going to be built potentially, and those homes that are built are going to cost more. So at the end of the day, we do have to shine the light on what's going to happen when we put tariffs on every industry. But it's a relief. Any industry is getting looked at perhaps getting taken out of the equation because the less tariffs, the better. So I'm hoping that continues as the realization becomes clearer that how harmful these tariffs are going to be. Perhaps today it's gas, but tomorrow the lumber industry, and after that, agriculture, because we don't want to pay $5 for a loaf of bread we used to pay $3.50 for at the end of the day.
Yeah, I think that this is like it's one of those things where there'll be like short-term pain and then the long-term story. Obviously, we can only speculate about that right now. Housing prices is obviously a huge one. I did see somebody wrote an email into the show a while ago and said, you know what, if the lumber tariffs are really heavy and if this really does impact the cost of importing Canadian lumber to the U.S., maybe Canadian builders would have less of a tough time getting access to the wood they need. It might drop the price of wood in Canada. Who knows? Maybe that's a pipe dream, but maybe that's a silver lining. Sabine, can you see that happening? Is there potentially like a silver lining to these tariffs, aside from maybe bringing a nation together? I've seen a lot of people saying we need to do more refining here at home. We need to do more manufacturing. We need to find other export markets. All of this stuff really makes sense. But are there any other silver linings?
I don't see any silver linings with the trade war, personally. I've looked at historical examples, and these conversations have been had in the past, and it ends up that nobody wins. Everybody suffers financially, especially the poorest in society, especially just average everyday consumers. And we've done it before with Canada and the United States, and we've seen historically there aren't any silver linings at the end of the day. Trade has to be free so that people save money, people get the best prices for their products, and industries thrive. Having trade partners allows industries to thrive. There's no need for there to be trade restrictions so that the lumber industry in Canada thrives. It's thriving. It's doing a great job in providing lumber in Canada and the United States. Why cut off a part of that income that they're making that employs so many Canadians? At the end of the day, nobody wins in a trade war. Nobody wins when there's tariffs slapped on. Nobody wins when there's retaliatory tariffs. It's just bad policy.
Elizabeth, do you think these tariffs could encourage more domestic manufacturing in the States? That would obviously be big in the Rust Belt and in a lot of the areas that strongly supported Donald Trump in the most recent election. Or do you think American companies are too reliant on Canadian supply chains for that to even happen?
I think it could boost domestic manufacturing. However, I don't think we need tariffs to do that. I think we can do that without tariffs. And this is part of the issue is if we put tariffs immediately happening, then we don't have that infrastructure necessarily set up already to meet that demand. And so that's going to be part of the issue is there's just not going to be the availability of products for the consumers that they want. And so I think at the end of the day, we don't need these tariffs. They're going to be problematic for both sides, and consumers will be the losers, unfortunately.
Obviously, auto workers in your neck of the woods, as you mentioned, in Michigan could be greatly affected by this. Although, I mean, when you listen to Donald Trump talk about it, it sounds like this is going to be a huge boon for the auto sector in the U.S. But I think of dairy farmers in Wisconsin as maybe another example of areas that could be more acutely hit. I haven't asked at all. I've been a little bit I've been a little bit Canadian focused here. I haven't really talked about Mexico at all. But can you think of another impact in the United States, Liz, that we might see as a result of the tariffs, including on the Mexican side? To be honest with you, I haven't paid a lot of attention to how that's going to impact that relationship, Mexico and the U.S.
Yeah, well, I think with Mexico, they are a huge agriculture provider for us. So we're going to see a sticker shock at grocery stores. I think fruits, produce, a lot of those are going to increase for consumers. Again, when we're in this inflationary period, this is not the time for increased prices. So that's a big problem. And then back to the automobiles, being from Michigan, 13% of Michigan's gross state product is reliant on Canadian automotive trade. So if we're going to expand US oil production and lower prices at the gas pumps, but then if auto parts are just going to get more expensive nationwide, how is that a win for consumers on either side here? It's these supply chains between our two countries are so integrated between the three countries, really, but especially between the US and Canada. They're very highly integrated. I think this is one of the concerns is that most Americans don't understand that, especially when it comes to automobiles. Yes, we manufacture a lot of them, but a lot of these parts are coming from Canada. And coming from other places as well. And so it's really important that we maintain that relationship. I believe in 2022, Canada exported close to $13 billion in motor vehicle parts and accessories, and about 11.5 billion of that went directly to the US. So we're going to see a lot of sticker shock pricing happening if these tariffs go through.
Sabine, let me ask you this in closing. Pseudoscientist is watching right now on YouTube. Great handle. Says you only challenge someone if you have a chance to win, or you look crazy and low IQ. Under what conditions does Donald Trump submit to Canada? You can't even imagine that. Maybe pseudoscientist is watching from the States. I don't know, but that sounds like a bit of a defeatist perspective. Pseudoscientist maybe isn't up to speed on the story of David and Goliath. But is it true? Does Canada have a shot here? I don't think they're suggesting we just bend over backwards. But ultimately, I mean, the power imbalance is real.
I think it's going to feel like that, but once the numbers start to show up for consumers, once they start to see how much things are costing when you're attacking Canada, I think it's going to become very apparent to everyday Americans how difficult a trade war is going to be on their pocketbooks. So it may seem that way, but at the end of the day, when you're going to the pumps, if indeed there is a tariff on gas, you're going to be paying a lot more for your gas. You're going to be paying a lot more for your everyday essentials that you're already struggling to pay for with an affordability crisis. So it may seem that way, but a trade war just ends up hurting your pocketbook at the end of the day. So you're going to feel it.
I want to thank both of you for making yourselves available. Sabine, are you in Toronto proper?
I'm in Ottawa.
Oh, you're in
actually.
Ottawa, the nation's capital.
Yes.
Love it. Well, thank you for
Yes.
joining us from Ottawa. That's Sabine El-Chidiac, Elizabeth Hicks joining us from the great state of Michigan. Both of them collaborating on an editorial. Tomorrow's tariffs will hurt everyone. You can give that a read right now at consumerchoicecenter.org. Thanks to both of you. Appreciate your insights today.
Thank
Thank
you
you,
so much.
Ryan.
Yeah, you bet. We want